Welcome to You, Me and the Counselling World, the podcast dedicated to student counsellors and their road to getting qualified and beyond. Today it's episode 4 and we explore the subject of how to avoid overdoing it on your placement, how to make sure you implement self-care, and how you're able to begin to say no. Hi there, my name is Becky and I'm a counsellor and supervisor. Thanks for coming back for episode 4. I hope that you find this helpful. So today I thought it was a really good idea to talk about placements. What a big subject for everybody. And I know that so many student counsellors struggle with the idea of doing a placement and what it can mean, and the competition that people feel when everyone's talking about placements on their course, and you might well be the person that hasn't yet been able to even look up where to go for a placement, and where do I begin with that is probably what you're thinking. When you think about going to take a placement on, I guess there's so many things that are important, and one of the most important things I think is you. And I know that I say this a lot on this podcast and in my work with clients and supervisees, but actually it's about you finding a placement that works for you. If it doesn't fit into your life properly, or you can't work it in properly around your work or your family or your children, then it won't work for you and it won't be an enjoyable experience. So it's about finding the right place for you. There are some placements out there that I know place quite heavy demands on their counsellors, in the sense that they say, you know, if you come and join us, you'll need to make sure that you can give, half a day a week or something, or set hours. And sometimes that's just not always manageable for those people that are still in full-time work. They're still studying for their course, they've still got all of their other commitments to uphold, and they've still got all of their assignments. So sometimes it's just really difficult to say, well, I can give half a day a week at, on a Thursday or whatever it might be. So it is about making sure that you can find a placement that works for you. And it's all very well and good looking at it on paper and thinking, well, that could work, or I could make that fit. But it's got to be doable in reality. And the reason for that is, if you don't make it doable for you, and you begin to really compromise your own self-need and your self-care in order to make it happen, that can be really difficult. And it can be really, quite honestly, it can be detrimental to you in the way that you feel and to your experience, your very first experiences of working with clients. I do live in the real world. I do. I know that perhaps what I'm saying sounds a bit idealistic, but hear me out, because actually is what we're talking about here is trying to find a way for it to fit into your world somehow. And it might not be perfect and you might not get everything that you're looking for, but to meet as many of those needs as we can feels like it's a really important point and a really interesting way of looking at it, actually. One thing I wanted to touch upon is that the BACP talk lots about self-respect. They describe it as fostering practitioner self-knowledge, integrity and self-care. And what's really important with that is that we all have our own levels of limitation, I suppose. Everybody's so different. We all have different commitments in our world. And so you might be on a course with somebody that's perhaps, maybe in their late 50s or early 60s. Their children have grown up, they work, but they work part-time. They're studying for this course and this is what they want to do for the rest of their lives. For them, they want to work with clients, this is what they want to do. But you might be in your 20s or your 30s, you might have young children at home, you might still be working full-time in your day job, so to speak, and you're in a really different place to that person, to the older person that's on the course. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because although you both bring different things to the table, everyone's so different in what they can offer. If you begin to compare yourself to the person on the course that has a lot less on their plate in terms of being able to work less hours and have a financial stability in that way, don't have young children relying on them, sometimes then that, by comparing yourself with that person, you can feel like you're less, or you can feel like you're not doing so well. But actually you've got a lot on your plate that you're trying to do and trying to manage. And that's equally true sometimes of older people that take this on, and people that are they're finishing their career in whatever they were doing, and they choose to change over to counselling because it's something which is magical. They can offer so much. They've got a most amazing life experience. But often they do that perhaps at a time when they're having to care for their parents, for example, and they're having to really take hold of what their parents' needs are, and they're having to pick up the slack for them. So I'm not saying that every age group has got it easy. Nobody has. It's really, really difficult. But all I'm saying is, when you're thinking about comparing yourself, if in fact you need to compare yourself and look at the situation that somebody is in, if they're in a similar situation to you. I think comparing yourself is actually a really interesting point that leads me on to talking about that, actually, because do we need to compare ourselves when we think about placement? Or do we just need to think about what our own needs are? If I'm looking for a placement, then maybe I need to know that I can fit it in between my work and know that it will fit into my life. Maybe if I'm to do a placement, I only want to do it on a Saturday morning because that's time when I could go and it doesn't interfere with my income, in the sense that I can still continue to earn. And I want to do on a Saturday morning, and then perhaps I want to go home in the afternoon and be able to give myself a little bit of the self-care and then have Sunday off. So it's about differences, isn't it? And when we try to compare ourselves, we all have different preferences, and differences can become bigger and they can become more focusable on. So it's actually about realising that you can't compare yourself on any journey in this sense. It's actually about realising that you're doing the best that you can, and the people on the course are doing the best that they can, and that you might not want the same thing as one of your course peers. You might want something different, and maybe that's okay. Maybe being different and wanting something different is okay, because none of us are the same. We're all just human, aren't we? And life would be really boring if we were all exactly the same as each other. So maybe there's something about really being able to embrace the fact that there's differences. But I really strongly remember being on my diploma course, and, you know, as I said before, this is a decade or so ago now, more than a decade ago. And I still strongly remember the feeling of, oh my gosh, they've all signed up for a placement. I haven't been able to do it yet. I'm working, and, you know, at that point I wasn't working in counselling at all. I was doing something completely different. And realising that everybody seemed to be getting it together, not except for me. And actually the reality is that everybody wasn't getting it together at all. It was just my perception of it. But it created this real feeling of pressure and competition when you think about placements. And sometimes it would feel like there weren't enough placements available for us all, and it would feel like we had to sort of race and beat the competition to get there. And I remember feeling that real sense of comparing myself to other people, and just wishing that wasn't the way it was, because it really took away from something. It really took away from what the experience of a placement could be. So I very quickly adapted and learned to try and stop doing that, and realised that the situation that I was in was unique because nobody could walk in my shoes except for me. And sort of letting go of that feeling of needing to get this done, needing to get the hours done, trying to be realistic about what I could offer to a placement and how it would fit into my life became the most important thing. And this comes back to what the BACP say in terms of integrity and self-care. Because let's be honest, we could all take on a placement and we could take it on and be completely frazzled because we're going to do our day job, then we're rushing over to do a placement of an evening time, we're rushing back again, we start again the next day doing the same thing. We're getting our hours done, sure, we're getting it done, but to what cost? You know, to what cost is that's happening? Because it could be that is to the detriment of us as therapists. And so I think that it's really important to acknowledge what your own limitation is, to avoid taking on too much when you're on a placement. Because we all remember, and I remember this feeling of, wow, I've got all of these amazing skills now. I'm learning all of this stuff. And I'm dying to put this into practice with real people, you know, not just my course peers in triads, but I'm really wanting to put this out there with real clients. I want to help people. I want to be there and support them. And you get all of these skills and you want to put them together and you want to use them, and you see that the waiting list that some of the placements have, they've got a huge waiting list, some of them. And actually it can become the perfect storm, because what can happen is you can realise that you're able to help. You can realise that you've got the means to be able to help. And you may start to take on more than you would have liked to have, or more than actually is realistic for you to take on. And people get into situations where they begin to say yes, the placement rings up and says, I've got another client for you, can you take them? And they say, okay, yeah, I will this time. And then the next time the placement rings up, the same thing happens again, and they say, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll take it. And actually, this is where life can get really, really difficult, and people then don't allow enough gaps between clients. There's not enough time for them to process and write any process notes and things that they need. They perhaps start leaving notes and trying to remember a few days later what the session was about, and that can be, a very slippery slope. So it is about making sure that your diary is managed as best it possibly can. Yes, it will be inconvenient at times to have to go and do this. Let's be real. We've got lots of things to fit into our busy worlds, haven't we? We have so much to do. And sometimes it will be inconvenient to go on a placement and to work. You'll probably love it when you get there, and you'll have great experiences, and you'll be able to tick off those numbers. And most of the time you'll probably look forward to doing it. But it's what you won't look forward to is if you overdo it and you begin to overbook yourself and you begin to stretch yourself too far. That can be really, really difficult. So in order to avoid that happening, it's about being extremely boundaried with yourself and really realistic about what you can do. Maybe asking yourself the question of, if it takes me 6 months longer to get my client hours, am I okay with that? And if you are, knowing that you're okay with it, but actually you'll hopefully have a better experience of a placement, then maybe it's okay to almost give yourself permission and say, right, okay, well, I'll do this sort of 50% slower than I would have done, and know that it might take me, a year and a half instead of a year, for example. Just being aware of that is really a really good step, I think, a really important step to just know and to understand that. When you think about taking on lots of clients, some of that will be your need to want to help, your need to use these skills that you have. But there's also something really important in making sure that you're being the best that you can be for your clients, the people that are coming to work with you. And if you're feeling frazzled and you're feeling drained and you're tired and you've rushed from one place to another without having a meal, and you're coming home of an evening time and having to write up loads of notes because you haven't had a chance to do it yet, all of those things can really snowball really, really quickly. And that can become a negative experience, I believe. And I really want you all to have the most amazing experience of a placement. And I think that that's what lots of placement holders, the people that run the placements, they want you to have a good experience. But at the same time, they're overrun themselves, especially at the moment after the pandemic, or during the pandemic, should I say. We're not quite there for the after yet, are we? There's a real sense of them. They're stretched. They've got a waiting list as long as their arm. They've got people to support. So it's about that awkward moment when you have to say no, and they give you a call or drop you an email. How do you feel to say no? I can't actually, because I've got X, Y and Z that I'm still dealing with. To me, that's really honouring. It's honouring the placement, it's honouring the people that you'll be working with, and it's honouring you. Because the analogy goes, and you'll hear this all the time from me, you can't pour from an empty cup. You can't keep on pouring and giving to people and supporting them if you're not able to replenish yourself. And so that's what something is really, really important, that you're able to replenish yourself so that you can be with your clients and spend that time with them, and you all get the best experience then. You see, that's what's most important, isn't it? The other thing that I think is really important is if you have a diary and you set it all out and it all looks okay on paper, but in reality it becomes really difficult for some reason. Perhaps you haven't left enough gap, or perhaps you've left it a bit tight for travelling from one place to another, or perhaps you've booked it in such a way that you haven't got time to even grab a sandwich. If you've made an error in booking your diary, you're learning, this is all new to you, Don't be afraid to try and make a change there. You know, if you're running, some placements are very specific about what they want, but other placements will allow you to, run your own diary and see clients when it suits you and the client, if that makes sense. So if you've got to a point where actually this diary is not working out very well, it's feeling really stressful and difficult, don't be afraid to try and make those changes. And in my experience, clients can sometimes change. They can't always, but they can sometimes change, and it might be that you're struggling to ask them if you could possibly make their appointment half an hour later of a day or a different day altogether. But just checking it out with them and saying, is there any possibility that you could shift your time by however long, or, are you available on a different day? Just by doing that, you're honouring yourself and you're honouring the fact that you need that space. You don't need to share with them necessarily why you're asking for it, but you can say, is there any way that you could change this? And, in my experience of working with people are really amenable. They don't mind, and if they can change something, they normally will. And if they can't, then hopefully they'll be honest and open enough to say that they can't. And so it's about realising that it's not set in stone. If it's not working for you, you don't have to trudge on, you can make a change. The other thing that I sometimes hear from student counsellors is it's really difficult for them to know how many clients they can realistically hold, if that makes sense. Not so much from a time perspective, but more in terms of how much they can hold in terms of support and sort of carrying the client afterwards, if that makes sense. After a session finishes, we get better at being able to let that client go. We learn ways to do that. But at the beginning, it can be really quite mentally, what's the word? I guess it feels like you're mentally very tired and bunged up, if that makes sense, because you're carrying a lot of things for other people, a lot, you're holding a lot, you've experienced a lot with them. And so sometimes it can be really difficult to realistically and reasonably work out what you think you can do in terms of client numbers. So it might again look okay on paper, but it's not taking into account the emotional toll and the self-care that you need for yourself. So I would always suggest to people that you work up, maybe take on 1 or 2 clients for the placement to start with, if they will allow you to work in that way. And then you can always add more. But it's more difficult to take on too many and then say that you can't fulfil all of those different kind of commitments there. So always start in a smaller way, and then you can build up and work out what works for you. So it's about being quite boundaried, quite real and open with the placement, and being able to say, actually, I can realistically work with 2 or 3 people a week, and I'm going to try that, and then if I can take on any more, I will let you know. So being very boundaried and really being able to go to a place where you're being cautious, you're being tentative with it, I suppose. Because it is all too easy to think, well, I can do 5 or 6 a week, that'll be no bother, it's only 5 or 6 hours. But actually, on top of work and family life and your assignments and going on your course each time you've got to go there, and all of the mental headspace that it all takes up, it can actually then become a bit too much. So it is about knowing your limitations, and that's nothing negative about you. It's not negative to know your limitations. That's a positive thing, and that's something which I absolutely love in supervisees when I'm working with them. If they know where their limitation is, that's actually really helpful, because you know that they're not going to be cocky about it. They're not going to be bolshy and think that they can do more than they can. It's about being very grounded and very realistic and very sort of centred about it. So it's okay to put your need first sometimes. It's okay to set this up in a way that it's going to work for you to be on a placement. And it's okay to accept that it might take you a bit longer. You might not get all of your hours quite as quickly as you wanted to. But just know that the experience of getting there will be so much more enjoyable for you, and so much more natural and so much more nourishing than it would be if you tried to cram in 5 or 6 hours a week with clients and ended up feeling, quite honestly frazzled by the end of it. So you can always add and put more clients in much more easily than you can cut back, if that makes sense. So being very cautious with that is just, I think, one of the best ways of building this up, and there is nothing wrong in that. Some people take on their placement and see one client a week for the entire placement, and that's absolutely fine. That is okay. It's about what is okay for you. There might be other people on your course that prefer to do a solid day. They want to get the hours done, they want to move on quickly, and they want to do a solid day with clients and get the hours built up. That works for them, and there's nothing wrong in that. But it's just about remembering that you can't compare yourself with your peers. It's like comparing apples and pears or bananas and oranges. It's not the same. You're not the same as them and they're not the same as you. And I think that that's the thing that can really spoil a diploma course, is if you feel as if it's becoming competitive in some way, or you feel as if you're being left behind, or you're lesser of a counsellor somehow because you're not seeing so many people. It's actually really valuable to know your own limit and to know what will work better in your life. That's really valuable, and that actually says so much about you and what you're trying to do. So it's about being sensible and realistic all the way through this. The other thing I wanted to mention today is actually about supervision, because with placements, sometimes they provide supervision, usually, or more often than not, in a group, like a group supervision session. And they can be great. They can be a really great opportunity to meet other people and to enjoy, having a really good talk about who you're working with and how it's going, and hearing other people's experiences of working with clients too. Can be extremely rich. And in some placements, they don't offer any of that. They can't afford to offer it. And you have to cover your own supervision. If that happens, then you've got the freedom to then choose the person that feels like they're a good fit for you. In some respects, although you've got to pay for the privilege, at least you will be able to find the person that fits in and makes your placement journey so much easier. And I would say, when you're thinking about supervision, the focus obviously will be on talking about your clients, but the focus actually also ideally needs to be about you too, about you talking about your limits, about you talking about how difficult this is to fit this into your life, or how you might be ready to take on more clients now. So it's about you talking about your stuff, and not just in relation to this, but in relation to everything that's going on in terms of how you're finding your client work and the things that you feel like you might have done wrong one day. And I'm going to make a whole podcast episode, probably more than one to be honest, on supervision, because it's such a big topic, isn't it? It's huge, and it's such a big part of what we all do together. For me, I think talking through with your supervisor about knowing that you've got limitations, and those limitations, that word feels to me like it's such a negative word, but it's not saying that you're limited or you're not experienced enough or you're not good enough. It's not saying that. We've all got limitations. Me included. I've got my own limitations, and I know that when I book in my diary, I've got to book it in a certain way, with a certain amount of gaps, with a certain amount of clients each day. Because if I don't do that, I know that it can tip into something which isn't manageable for me. So it's not just because you guys are all learning this and training in it. This is something that will stand you in good stead through the rest of your career, because it's about realising that you can't do it all. Is what you can do though, is you can be aware of what you need in terms of your own planning and your own life, and realising that at different times of your life you'll have more time. At other times of your life, you'll have less time. Things will be really hectic and busy. And so it's about adapting and changing to that, and realising that you can change it. So when you think about supervision, it's about bringing some of this stuff into it and being able to say to your supervisor, oh my gosh, the other day, whatever you're saying to them. I travelled and then I had to go and see a client, and then I got back and it was 9 p.m. I hadn't even eaten and I was tired and I needed to get the children's lunch boxes ready for the next day, and I didn't even sit down to 10 p.m. You know, all of those sorts of things that can happen. Take that to your supervisor. Let them help you to find ways to make this manageable so that it's not to your detriment. That's so important, isn't it? It's not to your detriment, because your needs are just as important. So you let your supervision help you with that, to really explore what's going on and why it is that you've ended up in the situation that you have. Just know that it can be changed. You've just got to work with your supervisor and your placement to find a way to help make that better. And you're learning, so there will be mistakes that you make along the way. And that's okay. It's about understanding that that's all right and giving yourself permission for that, I suppose. I really hope all of that kind of makes sense. I'm aware that I've talked a lot about that today, and something I'm really passionate about actually as I'm sitting here now talking, and I realise that I do know how difficult it is to be on placement. I know that you guys have got so much on your plates with it all. And I just want to find those ways to help reach out and make it easier, and to let you know that you've got some choices there. You know, you really have. And if you're in a placement and it doesn't meet your needs for whatever reason, then you can change. You know, you have an obligation to the clients that you're working with. But once those clients finish, you can choose to not take on any more, and you can look for an alternative placement. You don't have to stay, it's not set in stone. And work with the placement to find a way to help it to work better for the both of you, for you and for them, because they need you as well. You know, they've got clients and they've got people on their lists and they want you to succeed in this. So just be aware that you've got the choices, and all of these things should hopefully help you to avoid doing too much whilst you're on placement, and help to make it, hopefully, a much better and richer experience for you. I've spoken a lot about that today, and I hope it all kind of makes sense in some way. If you've got any thoughts about this and you want to reach out, I've got a Facebook page. You know, please come and have a word and, you know, drop on and let me know your thoughts on this and what your experience has been around placements. Please do, if you've not already followed me on the platform of your choice, you know, wherever you fancy, Spotify or Apple Music or Amazon. I'm everywhere. I tell you, I'm everywhere. If you haven't yet been able to hit the follow, please do that so you don't miss any future episodes. It would be lovely to have you on board, and feel free to pass this podcast to anybody that you think might find this helpful. I'm just trying to reach out to as many people as I can at the moment, and I really value the input. The people that have been in contact on Facebook in the last couple of weeks have all been absolutely lovely, so massive thank you. It's been really given me a massive boost to hear from you all, and it's just been lovely to hear how much you've appreciated the podcast so far, especially when it's so new to me. So thank you so much for that. It means a lot. Anyway, that's the end of episode 4. Until next time, I really look forward to connecting with you again. Take care. Bye bye.